9:06 here on the great WRKO. Okay, my friends. According to media reports, in the movie itself, American Sniper, it's been widely reported that Chris Kyle, the American Sniper, the man with the most confirmed kills in U.S. military history, allegedly died, was shot to death at a Texas gun range when he took Marine Eddie Ray Ruth, who allegedly had been suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And when he took him to the gun range, that's when Eddie Ruth turned a gun on Chris Kyle. And that's always been the accepted, established narrative. Well, there is now a bombshell new report that says, you know what? No. In fact, Chris Kyle's killer may not have had PTSD at all, but in fact, there is some evidence emerging that he was a Muslim terrorist sympathizer. And in particular, some soldiers, veterans who have looked into this, have pointed out that Eddie Ruth could not have suffered from PTSD because he was in Iraq for only one tour in 2007 at Balad Air Base, which was the second largest U.S. installation in Iraq. However, he never saw any combat. None. He had no combat experience. Not only did he have no combat experience, but he never even had any aspect of a traumatic event, such as incoming mortar or rocket fire. Nothing. But what he did do was guard Muslim terrorists and inmates, prisoners, at Balad Air Base. And apparently there is now evidence coming out that he was sympathetic to these Muslim terrorists, these prisoners' living conditions, the fact that he did not like our invasion of Iraq, he disagreed with our policy, he was reluctant to engage in combat, and it may appear now that he became a sympathizer to many radical Islamists and their cause. And the man who's now been breaking that story is the one and only Walid Shubat. We've had him on this show before in the past. He is one of the world's leading experts on the Middle East and on Islamic terrorism. Walid, welcome back to the Cooner Report. How are you?
You bet, Mr. Cooner. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so
how are you?
Walid, I'm doing great. I've been teasing this story literally the whole show. When I saw this, I said, wow, this could be one of the biggest stories of our time. Walid, I have to ask you, you're the one in many ways who broke this story. Why do you suspect Chris Kyle was not killed by Eddie Ruth because he had PTSD, but because he was a Muslim terrorist sympathizer?
Well, number one, I have from my own experience, having lived my life as a terrorist, and my father also taught Islamic studies. And, you know, it is very common to get a bill that says you're either schizophrenic or bipolar or have this post-traumatic stress syndrome. And I recall from my own experience when my father went to a daycare, and I warned them. I said, this is a Muslim fundamentalist, because my father was always the type of person that is always a fanatic. And they thought that this was absolutely nonsense, what I was telling them, until one day he tried to convert a nurse to Islam. She refused, and he held the warden hostage. He held the whole ward hostage. And police had to come, and, all kinds of mess happened. And I told them, I said, this is a Muslim fundamentalist. They always try to get those kind of documents. You had a killing one time here in the United States in which I think the guy was from Pakistan, killed some Jewish folks, and he claimed to be insanity. So the insanity plea is always the case.
Walid, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but just for our audience, You were once a terrorist, a Muslim terrorist. However, you converted to Christianity, and now you've been leading a crusade to expose the danger and threat of radical Islam. In fact, you've written some best-selling books, but go ahead, continue, my friend.
Yes. I was very interested when I found that the War Fighter Foundation, which is a non-profit veteran group, filed a Freedom of Information Act, requested to obtain information about Ruth's service record. And I quote them verbatim. Eddie Ruth, this is what came from the information. This is reliable. Eddie Ruth served one tour in Iraq in 2007 at Balad Air Base, as you eloquently stated. The second largest U.S. installation in Iraq, with no significant events, no combat experience. Let me say that again. He never saw combat or any suspect of traumatic events associated with a combat deployment, incoming mortar, rocket fire, as you stated. So he never left the air base. He was hanging around Muslim fanatics the whole time. Now, we look at certain features when we examine cases. We do it all the time. With the Bergdahl case, that kind of hints usually gives us a litany of information.
Okay, now, Wally, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but just to set it up for my audience, he was watching the Muslim prisoners at Balad Air Base, correct?
Correct, continuing.
He was like a guard. He was basically a prison guard, correct?
Correct.
Okay, go ahead, continue.
He made phone calls with his father talking about the situation of the prisoners, how he felt sorry for them, how he felt bad for them, and all these things. So he had sympathy towards the terrorists. But then you look at certain features. In fact, I wrote an entire article how we usually, look at these features that determines that the person is fundamentalist. You look, I showed several photos of Islamists. In Islam, a Muslim fundamentalist must trim the mustache and elongate the beard more than the mustache. In other words, you don't have to have a very long beard, but your beard is usually elevated further than your mustache. So you trim your mustache continually in accordance to the Islamic hadith, elongate the beard and trim the mustache. And so from that perspective, you take a look at this, and you take a look at his sympathies, and you take a look at he doesn't have post-traumatic stress syndrome, and you take a look at his statements that he made and how he is sympathizing. I stated that there is, enough evidence to look at his history. Whether he was another Bergdahl is something that we need to look into. However, this is not all conclusive 100%, but it's nevertheless, it's been always spot on when we look at cases like this, specifically with Bergdahl. With Bergdahl, it turned out to be a litany of information that later on came out that showed that Bergdahl indeed was an Islamist and had converted to Islam. So in this case with the killer of Kyle, we have a case very similar to Bergdahl. So we have case in point as well. Bergdahl, it's not unusual for servicemen to go there and get brainwashed by Islamists. However, I need to look further into the matter to find out more information. Whether it will come out, I'm sure there is other information from witnesses that will come out sooner or later to show that this man have targeted, Kyle for a reason. Why not kill somebody else? Why Kyle, And this guy is wanted. Kyle is wanted by Islamic jihadis. He is one of the top list wanted. So why would this man supposedly have a post-traumatic stress syndrome, has been a guard for Muslims, has been looking like a Muslim, acting like a Muslim, sympathizing with Islamists, and then kills one of the most wanted by the Islamists, and then we say he has post-traumatic stress syndrome? Is always the case in all these terrorist activity in which terrorists will claim insanity. They understand even from the Middle East, they understand the West, and they claim insanity. This is not the first case. This guy knows the route, knows the tricks, and had claimed post-traumatic stress syndrome. So I believe we need to look at this case more carefully and examine it to see and find out what other information we have from friends and witnesses And I can guarantee you they can come out and testify, and we will find out that this is the case. Because once you see those features, you see this kind of behavior, then you have a suspicion that this person, you know, and it's something to do with profiling. I know in America profiling is frowned upon, but it's not something that Israelis don't do. It's not something that other countries don't do, and we need to do profiling. So I did a whole report showing the problems in America when it comes to profiling and how you can profile. Had we profiled, 9/11 would have never happened, because if you look at Muhammad Atta, the mastermind behind 9/11, they have certain features. Forehead impression from prayer. You know, although Ruth still hasn't developed it, but many Muslims develop this, and then if they're shaven, that's a major problem. So, you know, we need to start profiling at airports and profiling in the military and seeing those kind of signs to kind of catch, you know, and determine who's good, who's bad, and who's ugly.
We're talking with Walid Shubat, one of the world's leading experts on terrorism and the Middle East. Walid, you mentioned that the killer of Chris Kyle, Eddie Ruth, had certain pro-Muslim sympathies that he expressed while he was in prison. While he was guarding Muslim prisoners at Balad Air Base in Iraq. Do you know what those sympathies were in particular?
Well, during a phone conversation with his father, Ruth expressed sympathy for the detainees, and he was discontent, and he was discontent also with the war. He didn't like to participate in the war. He doesn't like how the war is conducted, and he had a reluctance to engage in combat. In other words, he stated that he does not want to fight if he had to fight. And he always complained about he lamented the prisoners' poor conditions. So from that perspective, he has a sympathy towards the terrorists. He's sympathizing with terrorists. What poor conditions? I mean, terrorists who kill Americans supposed to have great conditions. So he was, absolutely against Kyle. He was determined to the point of killing the man. So when you kill a man, especially in that caliber, that should ask the question. He doesn't have post-traumatic stress syndrome. He was sympathetic with these Islamic terrorists. He looked like a Muslim. He acted like a Muslim. So there is enough reason to suspect and to look further into the matter.
Walid, let me just play devil's advocate for a second. Okay, Eddie Ruth, we know, killed Chris Kyle, a great American hero. Whether it's because of PTSD or because he was either a Muslim convert or a Muslim sympathizer or a stealth jihadist, who cares? Either way, he deserves the death penalty. What does it matter, Walid, whether it's because of PTSD or because of his pro-Islamic sympathies?
Well, motive is everything. The motive of killing someone because you're a jihadi isn't the same thing as going inside a liquor store and asking for money. We're talking about terrorism, and we're talking about the infiltration of terrorism in the military. So it is one thing to try to fight crime on the streets, and then to try to fight, terrorism at a level where the military is involved. We take a look at the case of Bergdahl, the infiltration mechanism. In other words, we don't even talk about it because it deals with Islam, and so the infiltration mechanism is much higher. It enters into the arena in which you have Bergdahl's father go to the Rose Garden and do the Bismillah, while his son and him were very involved. In fact, he urged Muslims that he will work to try to get more released through the president. This is at a very high level. So in other words, if we don't begin to expose these things and do this kind of profiling at the military and at our service in the airports and everywhere else, this kind of infiltration becomes very, very dangerous, because you're dealing with airports, you're dealing with weapons, you're dealing with nuclear facilities. Look, my brother served in the Air Force. He was very sympathetic towards the causes of the enemy, and he guarded nuclear facilities, and he carried a U.S. passport that was colored red, which means he has security clearance. those kind of things are very serious. And his allegiance, as he trains his children, is not towards the flag of the United States of America, but towards the Palestinian flag and towards Islam. So this is very serious when they enter into the arena of the military. Let's not forget that the first infiltrator, or the best of infiltrators, is Ali Muhammad. Ali Muhammad was a Muslim Brotherhood affiliate, Al-Qaeda affiliate, and he was the first to write the instruction manual for Al-Qaeda. And it became such an embarrassment. He was found guilty but never sentenced. We don't even know where he is. The CIA doesn't disclose anything about Ali Muhammad. This is how embarrassing it is after the U.S. discovers that this kind of infiltration is very possible, in which someone could work as a double agent. In the case of Bergdahl, he was also a double agent in which the family worked collectively, the father and the son, in releasing 5 top Taliban officials, top Taliban fighters, leaders, who one of them went back to circulation. Those are very serious. And this goes at the top level of President Obama. So we're not talking about a civil issue here. We're talking about a major security issue here. So, when we look at Bergdahl, his sympathies with Anwar al-Awlaki, if you look at his social media, he types in Arabic language. How come the CIA or the FBI hasn't looked into this? In fact, I tracked Bergdahl's writings, and he commented himself on one YouTube video, and he says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, you are who we worship and who we obtain mercy, and which means he converted to Islam. Praise be to Allah. Amen. My prayers for all Muslim nation, Ummah, the nation of Islam, the nation of the Muslims, be heard. And may Allah free my son from captivity in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most beneficent. It is thee whom I worship. It is thee whom I seek refuge. This is not a patriotic American. He's sympathizing as well.
Waleed, sorry, I don't want to cut. You're such a learned man, and you know this so well. But just for the audience, the layperson out there. So when Bergdahl's father, when he made that, whatever you want to call it, the statement in Arabic, it was basically almost a declaration of faith in Islam, correct?
Absolutely. No one says to thee I worship Allah. This comes exactly verbatim from the Quran itself. This is not something you make up in a prayer and just say, just God, Allah is God, and so it's the same thing. It's equivalent, because the statements are very much 100% Islamic statements that comes from the Quran. When they say, thee, Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in in Arabic, thee I worship and thee I seek refuge. This is typed in the Arabic language. He knows Arabic. And then his favorite, with other folks like Mufti Ismail Menk, who was another favorite of Tsarnaev, the Boston bomber. His favorite speaks volumes. The videos he links to, he looks at, everything should say something. Fight them so that there be no mischief, and the religion will be all Allah's. Surah 39, he quotes. So this is talking about jihad. It's not just talking about conversion to Islam to pray 5 times a day towards Mecca. But Bergdahl's quotes from the Quran uses warfare quotes. And he also knows Farsi. This is a double agent. So his learning of the Arabic language, in fact, I tracked how he learned the Arabic language. He didn't learn the Arabic language from some website that teaches Arabic. He learned the Arabic language from jihadi websites that teaches the Arabic language. So the link where he links to learn the Arabic language is jihadi websites. Then he memorizes Ayat al-Kursi, which is the protective prayer of all Muslims. This is a personal prayer. There's nothing to do with him trying to, let's say, convince the Taliban to release his son, but he quotes these prayers, these private prayers that are memorized in the Quran verbatim. So he's a memorizer of Quranic verses as well. And then he subscribes to Al-Ghuraba Media, which is a virulent jihadi YouTube media that features Osama bin Laden. And I could go on for hours with this guy. In fact, even if you look at Intellius with the Bergdahl, what does it say? It says places that he worked at: Army Times, Taliban. Hello? I mean, he's proud to say that he works for the Taliban. That's how it went on Intellius.
Sorry, Wally, I don't mean to
cut. He contacts Abdul Qadir Balkhi.
Wally, so I don't want to cut you off because I want to ask you about what's going on in Jordan. But before I get to Jordan, very quickly, just to go back to Chris Kyle to bring this full circle, is it in your opinion that Eddie Ruth, the killer, the murderer of Chris Kyle, do you believe this was done as an act of Muslim terrorism?
When you put all the things together, from hindsight and from experience, I would say it is a 90% chance this guy was a recruited terrorist who was recruited in prison. And I would say that this man needs to be seriously investigated. In other words, look at every phone bill, every phone call, every single thing he's done. We will find out, and I can almost guarantee it, that this man has been involved with Islamists and has done this act specifically to execute an American hero and to execute somebody who is wanted by the jihadists.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Waleed, I've got 3 minutes, my friend. Jordan is now enraged at the burning alive of that Jordanian air pilot. The king of Jordan, King Abdullah, is vowing to pummel, to punish ISIS. He's now executed 2 al-Qaeda terrorists. He vows to execute even more. My question to you is this, Waleed. What does it say about us that the Jordanians are willing to execute terrorists while we're wringing our hands about waterboarding them? And in fact, we're releasing many of them, like the Taliban 5, right back into the battlefield.
Well, it says that King Abdullah of Jordan isn't cut from the same cloth as President Obama, who releases terrorists while King Abdullah hangs them. And this is what needs to be done, because King Abdullah realizes that the terrorists will use this type of thing in which they want to release terrorists. So King Abdullah says, I'm going to hang them. This way there's no negotiating factor. While with the U.S., there's a negotiating factor. You got Gitmo. And so they could kidnap Bergdahl. Of course, this whole thing's trumped up. And then begin to request top leaders in Taliban. And this will continue the efforts of the terrorists to kidnap more Americans. And then there will be civilian Americans, not just military. And so what we're doing here is really invoking the terrorists to do more of these types of things. From our experience living in Israel, the Israelis used to say, no way. They never negotiated with terrorists. And this should be the modus operandi of the United States. But we do negotiate with terrorists. And what do? We exchange terrorists for other terrorists like Bergdahl. This is absolutely appalling of what the U.S. is doing. Now, however, killing Mu'adh al-Kasasbeh, tells us much about the jihadi mentality. They use Islam from its top level, from Ibn Taymiyyah's jurisprudence, and we need to look into the Islamic religion itself. This comes from the top jurisprudence of Islam in how they burned him and why they burned him. So we need to look into this ideology and why they're doing this kind of things. Most Americans don't even know why he was burned alive. It comes from Ibn Taymiyyah in Islam. So if horror of commonly desecrating the body while alive is a call for them, the infidels, to believe in Islam or to stop their aggression, it is from here that we carry out the punishment and the allowance for legal jihad. This is about desecrating human beings alive. Why burn him? In fact, ISIS has issued a release asking folks of how to execute him. There was one who suggested to execute him by al-Khazouk, which is impaling. They opted for burning. Why? Because this came from Al-Raqqa, where the U.S.-led coalition were striking Al-Raqqa with many terrorists burned. And so they concluded from the Quran, which Americans need to begin to understand the Quran, al-Mithaliyah, how to do aggression in the same way the enemy was aggressive towards you. In other words, the Islamists take the Quran and use the Quran in which it says, do the same mischief as the enemy did to you. So they concluded that since Muslim jihadis burned alive by the U.S.-led coalition, the pilot must burn alive in a cage for the whole world to see. And this is the kind of thing that we see now. And, in fact, this has been leaked, a month ago, and I knew about it, that, Al-Kasasbeh was already killed. And so, we have a situation where Jordan says, okay, we will kill your terrorists, You kill our soldiers, we'll kill your terrorists. The U.S. needs to do the same thing. Begin to execute all the terrorists who was involved in terrorism in Guantanamo, or else you're never going to get rid of that problem.
We have been talking with Walid Shoebat, one of the world's leading experts, frankly, one of the few brave voices out there on the Middle East, on Islamic terrorism. Walid, where can people go from Cooner Country to read your stuff and get more information?
Very simple. As you spell the word shoe, I will not be insulted, shoe, S-H-O-E, and bat. Just remember your shoe and your bat. One word, SHOEBAT.com. Shoebat.com. Yes, sir.
Walid, we're going to have you back on soon, my friend, to talk more about ISIS and how we can defeat the Islamic State. Walid, as usual, dynamite stuff. Keep up the great work, my friend.
Blessings to you. Thank you.
Take care, Walid. 617-266-6868. Okay, you heard Walid Shoebat. Let me ask you this. Do you believe that Chris Kyle was now executed, assassinated by a potential stealth Muslim terrorist? 617-266-6868. Was this